So most of the chassis modifications have been done in a separate video. I will leave a link in the description below, but if you have not yet seen that video or not really interested in seeing that video, I also did it in this video but then sped up. So basically I wanted to lower the model and also give it some stance by adding some camber. The first thing I needed to do was create some space for the new wheels to fit in. These are wheels from a Tamiya Nissan R34 Skyline Z-Tune. At the Nismo version, that is, of course. I moved on to making them fit by removing some material from that subframe and then checking it all over again, making sure they fit in, had the correct offset, and were still spinning freely. So now that the wheels fit in, we also want to give it a bit of a cambered and stanced look. So we removed some material from the top side of that suspension, creating a free space for the disc brake to move inwards and creating that cambered effect. So now that the camber has been set, we repeated the same process to the other side and then moved on to lowering the car. So there is a small bit of bridge between the suspension on the top side, which needed to be removed. That normally holds the disc brake in place, creating the stock ride height, and by removing that we are now free to set the ride height as desired. So with the rear done, we also needed to do a similar thing to the front. We cut off the suspension piece on the top, drilled a hole so we can insert a pin to maintain that same center of the suspension, and then we lowered the suspension by removing some from the top. So now that the suspension has the correct ride height, we insert the pin, glue it all shut, and the car is lowered. But by lowering that suspension, the suspension arm is also not in the correct position anymore, so we bend that down a bit, and to create the camber we drill an extra hole more to the left inwards and insert that pin in there, and thus creating that cambered effect on the front as well. And after doing this all, we still maintain the turning and the spinning of the wheels, as we did not really adjust the way that the wheels were mounted. So now that the new wheels are on, they are set at the correct height and also have a nice stance to them. We also want some nice big brakes behind those wheels to look cool. So we started by modifying the stock disc brakes, as we are not going to use them. They are way too small and would look kind of weird. But we still want to maintain the rolling of the wheels. We just want to add the look of the new brake. So we cut out most of the outer side, or pretty much the disc and the caliper from the stock disc brake, and then sanded it flush, so we are left with the hub and also the inside piece that mounts to the normal suspension. So the brake and caliper set we will be using is from Fujimi. Once you buy one of their aftermarket wheel sets, they mostly come supplied with one of these sets of disc brakes as well. So the inner hub needs to fit inside of this disc brake, so we needed to remove a bit of material, sand it down a bit, and make it flush with that new part, and creating a super tight and nice fit. We glued it in and rotated it into the correct position so that the caliper is at the position we wanted inside of that wheel. After doing all those modifications, the rest of the parts were prepped and primed, of course, with some Zero Paints primer. And as usual, after giving all the parts a bit of primer, we move on to applying various colors. The springs and dampers got some yellow paint to simulate some sort of aftermarket springs and dampers, and the main chassis itself got some textured black to give it that undercoated look. The exhaust differential and driveline got painted with some silver, and then afterwards the exhaust got a bit of weathering with some alclad burnt iron. And also, as usual, after all the parts have received their main colors, we move on to detailing. And for detailing, we just take out a brush, either from Tamiya or Citadel, or whichever brush you would prefer, and some Vallejo paints, in this case some normal black, to simulate a couple of rubbers on some of the suspension, steering, and also driveline components. Since pretty much all of the detail for the chassis, except the rear subframe assembly and some of the front subframe assemblies, are molded in, we needed to paint those silver as well, just using some brushes and also some silver paints from Vallejo again. And after detailing that chassis and adding some black to the center of this disc ring caliper setup, we also detailed the caliper itself with a permanent marker just on top of the silver that the part comes plated in from factory, giving it a sort of candy apple red effect. Now, just a side note, this does not work on painted surfaces. This only works on this plated surface that the disc also came plated in from the factory. If you do this on a painted surface, it might wipe the paint away, as these permanent markers are pretty much always alcohol based. Now, after all of that detailing was done, we could move on to assembly. And for assembly, we use some MaxiCure from Bob Smith Industries. This is just a regular super glue. With all of the assembly of this chassis now done for this part, we finished the radiator off by painting that silver and then finished this chassis off for now. Now, I was so excited to finish the entire build off that I completely forgot to weather it, so that will be in the next part after we assemble the entire build and do some of that final weathering to the chassis as well.